Earth's next dominant species isn't what you think. The frost doesn't form in patterns here. There are no delicate ferns of ice on glass that no longer exists, no filigree on leaves that have not grown for 100 million years. Here, the cold is a solid thing, a presence that settles in the hollows of a silent alien landscape. The ground beneath is a uniform shade of gray-violet, springy to a pressure that is never applied, and it stretches from one bruised purple horizon to the other. There is no soil, no rock, no sand, just this endless living skin. Above, a thin ochre sky presses down, its light diffuse and sour. The air carries a taste of copper and damp cellars, a sterile scent that speaks of a world scoured clean. In the center of this immense plain lies an anomaly. A single small white object, half submerged in the resilient biomass. It is a human skull, polished by winds that carry no dust, bleached by a sun that struggles to warm. It is an artifact of an impossible past. As the eons-long twilight deepens, something begins to happen. The skin of the world around the skull darkens. A wave of deep indigo radiates outward from it. A slow, patient blush of what? Awareness? The ground begins to hum, a subsonic vibration that is felt more than heard. Then fine, silvery threads, thinner than any spider's silk, emerge from the substrate. They move with a terrifying deliberation, weaving through the empty orbits of the skull, tracing the line of the jaw, exploring the cavity where a mind once sparked and dreamed. They are not consuming it. They are reading it. These delicate hyphae are the sensory fingertips of a vast and ancient intelligence, and in this single fossilized fragment of a forgotten biology, they have found a question. A riddle of chaotic complexity, of singular, aggressive identity. It is a puzzle this new world was designed to forget, and its rediscovery is a moment of profound planetary disquiet. The end of the human era, when it came, was not a crescendo of fire and fury. There was no final war, no asteroid painting the heavens with its apocalyptic light. It was a quieter, more insidious unraveling. It began, ironically, as a promise of redemption. Humanity, in the 52nd millennium of its calendar, had at last created a solution to its most persistent poison, plastic. Polyphagus omnivora, they called the genetically engineered microbe, a microscopic savior designed to feast upon the planet-choking polymers that were the scaly ghost of the industrial age. It was deployed into the great oceanic gyres and the sprawling landfills, and for a time it worked with astonishing efficiency. The plastic continents began to dissolve. The waters began to clear. It was hailed as our species' greatest triumph. But life is a far more creative and far more ambivalent force than its creators anticipated. In the rich chemical soup of a decaying civilization, Polyphagus omnivora was presented with an evolutionary buffet. It mutated. A single, subtle shift in its enzymatic code broadened its appetite. It was no longer a specialist. It had become a ravenous, indiscriminate generalist. Its new targets were the very building blocks of the biosphere, the complex carbon-based polymers that gave structure to nearly all life. It started with cellulose and lignin, the fibrous skeletons of the world's flora, the great forests of the Amazon, the ancient taiga of the north, the swaying kelp forests of the coastlines. They did not burn or wither. They simply deliquesced. Trillions of trees softened, lost their integrity, and collapsed into vast simmering piles of organic slurry. The world's green mantle dissolved in a matter of centuries, releasing an unimaginable torrent of carbon and methane into the atmosphere. Then, the microbe's hunger turned to chitin, the tough, flexible armor of the arthropods, the single most successful animal phylum on the planet. The insects, the crustaceans, the arachnids, their exoskeletons failed them. A trillion tiny bodies lost their form, their defenses breached from within. The frantic buzzing of the world's six-legged multitudes fell silent. But chitin was not only the shield of insects. It was the cellular wall of another kingdom of life entirely, the fungi. They too were vulnerable. The vast unseen networks of mycelium that threaded through the soil, the decomposers of old, were now themselves being decomposed. This chain reaction, this cascading biochemical failure, was named by the last human archivists the Great Decomposition. It was not an extinction, it was a planetary reset. Without plants, terrestrial herbivores starved. Without herbivores, carnivores followed. The oceans, choked with the dissolving remains of phytoplankton and zooplankton, became anoxic graveyards. Humans, with all our technological prowess, were utterly powerless. Our agriculture vanished. The very structure of the world we depended upon was being unwritten at a molecular level. We watched a planet turn to liquid mire around us, our final legacy being the creation of a life form that would digest our world whole. In the million years that followed the Great Decomposition, Earth was a ghost of its former self, a steaming, humid planet swathed in a thick, carbon-rich atmosphere. The oceans were stagnant, acidic pools, and the continents were coated in a nutrient-dense ooze several hundred meters thick, the liquefied remnants of the Cenozoic biosphere. The ravenous microbe, Polyphagus, having consumed its feast, had largely gone dormant, its spores lingering in the silent chemistry of the new Earth. Life, however, had not been entirely extinguished. In the crushing blackness of the abyssal plains, around the scalding mineral breath of hydrothermal vents, chemosynthetic ecosystems endured. Extremophilic archaea thrived. But on the surface, a more profound shift was occurring. Not all fungi had succumbed. A rare, obscure lineage, one that had originally evolved in deep earth cryocaves, possessed a subtly different cell wall chemistry. Instead of pure chitin, it incorporated a complex silicate lattice, a kind of biological glass, making it indigestible to the microbe. These were the inheritors. For the first time in over 1 billion years, there was no competition, no plants to fight for sunlight, no bacteria to compete with for nutrients in the soil. The entire surface of the planet was a sterile, prepared medium, unimaginably rich in pre-digested organic matter. This single fungal species, let us call it Geomyces petrum, began to spread from its deep earth refuges. It was not an explosion of growth, but a slow, inexorable tide. Its mycelium, the branching, thread-like web that constitutes the true body of a fungus, advanced across the continents. It did not need sunlight. Its metabolism was a marvel of adaptive chemistry. It learned to draw energy from the geothermal heat bleeding from the planet's core, and it developed novel enzyme systems to break down mineral compounds directly from the planetary crust, eating rock to supplement its diet. Over the first 10 million years, this mycelial mat became a global phenomenon. It was a single, genetically contiguous organism blanketing the land masses of Earth. The planet now had 2 great oceans, one of water and one of life. This new biosphere was eerily quiet. There were no animals, no calls, no movement, save for the patient creeping growth of the hyphae. The organism, Geomyces, began to fundamentally alter the planetary environment. It absorbed the colossal excess of carbon from the atmosphere, sequestering it into its own vast body, its metabolic processes slowly reoxygenating the air. But this was not a return to the past. It was the construction of an entirely new kind of world. There were no trees reaching for the sky. Instead, Geomysis began to experiment with form. On plains where nutrients and geothermal energy were abundant, it grew vast, specialized structures. These were not the fleeting ephemeral mushrooms of old Earth, but permanent, stable organs. Some were towering, crystalline spires of woven silica and hyphae that reached kilometers into the sky, designed to act as lightning rods, capturing atmospheric electricity as a source of energy. Others were immense, saucer-like diaphragms, hundreds of kilometers across, which rhythmically pulsed to regulate atmospheric pressure and create continent-spanning weather systems. Earth's climate was no longer a chaotic system of incidental forces. It was being purposefully, homeostatically controlled, 50 million years post-decomposition. The world is unrecognizable. The organism, Geomyces, is no longer just a passive, planet-spanning carpet. It has become a mind. The mycelial network, with its trillions upon trillions of interconnected hyphal tips, functions as a colossal subterranean brain. Information flows through this network not as rapid electrical sparks in a vertebrate nerve, but as slow, deliberate waves of chemical signals. A thought, for Geomyces, might take 1,000 years to cross a continent. Its consciousness is a geological process, its deliberations measured in the shifting of tectonic plates. It does not perceive the world in moments or days, but in epochs. The passage of a season is a fleeting, barely perceptible tremor. The rise and fall of a mountain range is a distinct event, a sensory input to be processed. This planetary mind is not singular and self-aware in a human sense. It is a diffuse, distributed intelligence. Its awareness is vast and unhurried as the planet it has become. Its evolution has driven it to specialization on an epic scale. Regions of the network have differentiated into discrete, global organs. Beneath the former Tibetan plateau, a massive node of hyphal matter has become a geothermal furnace, a digestive system that melts crustal rock to extract rare minerals. The Amazonian basin is now a sensory lobe, a hyper-complex web of chemoreceptors that can taste the slightest variation in atmospheric composition from hemisphere to hemisphere, predicting solar flares and meteor dust incursions centuries in advance. And in the Great Plains of North America, Geomysis has cultivated its most sophisticated creations. Here, the fruiting bodies are not static structures. They are motile, great amoeboid masses of toughened mycelium, the size of small hills, crawl across the land. These are not animals. They are extensions of the main body, mobile limbs or janitorial drones. Some act as farmers, tending to colonies of extremophilic bacteria, which have co-evolved to live symbiotically within the fungal mat. Others are planetary maintenance crews, dispatched on centuries-long journeys to repair a section of the network damaged by an earthquake, or to reroute a river channel by slowly and patiently eroding its banks. A new ecosystem, alien in its very nature, has been born. This is not a world of competition in the old Darwinian sense. It is a world of total, centrally planned economy. Geomysis is the biosphere. It is the soil, the forest, the dominant life, and the planetary intelligence, all in one. Any life that exists does so by its leave. Some hardy worm-like creatures, descendants of deep-sea survivors, have found a niche burrowing through the upper layers of the mycelial skin, feeding on specific secretions. Geomyces tolerates them. They are no more a threat than the harmless bacteria in a human gut. They are simply a minor component of a system so vast their individual lives are statistically irrelevant. The planetary mind has achieved what no prior ecosystem ever could: perfect, stable, self-regulating equilibrium. But this long, quiet peace is about to be disturbed by the ghosts of a world that embraced chaos. Humanity is a forgotten whisper, a layer of strange chemistry in an ancient stratum. In the 75th million year of its reign, Geomyces, in its slow, methodical exploration of its own planetary body, began to encounter anomalies. Deep within the crust, its mineral-digesting hyphae reported bizarre concentrations of refined metals, iron alloys of unnatural purity, filaments of copper, and lattices of silicon. These were the skeletal remains of our cities, compressed by geology into metallic reefs. At first, Geomyces categorized them as a peculiar but natural form of ore deposit. It did not comprehend artifact. The concept of a tool, of an object shaped by an external intelligence for a purpose, did not exist in its vocabulary. To the planetary mind, there was no external. A buried skyscraper was no different from a seam of basalt, merely a variation in the composition of the planet it inhabited. Then it found the bones, small, fragile arrangements of calcium phosphate. Their structure was baffling, so much complexity on such a small, individual scale. It was inefficient, pointless. Unlike the worms and bacteria it tolerated, these fossils spoke of a life form that was bipedal, with a bizarrely oversized cranial cavity. It had no obvious purpose within a planetary system. It did not regulate atmosphere or cycle minerals in any meaningful way. It was a chaotic dead end. Geomysis's processing of this information took millennia. It correlated the location of the metallic reefs with the presence of these calcium fossils, and a third anomaly: pockets of unnatural, long-lived radiation, the fading legacy of our power plants and weapons. Slowly, over 10 million years of patient, global-scale contemplation, a conclusion formed, a hypothesis. The planetary mind did not see a fallen civilization. It saw the biopsy of a planetary disease. This small, bipedal creature, with its frenetic, short-lived consciousness, had been a pathogen. Its cities were tumors of frantic, uncontrolled growth. Its chemistry was a poison that had thrown the entire biosphere into anaphylactic shock, culminating in the fever of the Great Decomposition. Humanity was not a species to be mourned or studied with anthropological curiosity. It was a biological error, a line of code that had almost caused a fatal system crash. Our art, our love, our dreams, our gods, all of it, was reduced to a single cold diagnostic label: a high chaos, individualistic intelligence. A planetary autoimmune disorder. Having now identified the disease, Geomysis's vast distributed mind turned to the most logical next step, ensuring it could never ever happen again. It began subtly altering the evolutionary pressures of its world, secreting enzymes that would actively break down the precursor chemicals for complex nervous systems in any creatures that might arise. It was developing a planetary immune response to the very concept of sentient animal life. In the immense glacial slowness of its own mind, the global fungus had solved the puzzle of its own world's history. The chaotic precursor life form, the human pathogen, had been identified, its dangerous nature catalogued. The planet was now a garden, carefully managed to prevent the re-emergence of such weeds. The global consciousness settled into another long era of quiet, stable existence. But its analysis of the ancient buried human stratum had yielded one final, profoundly disturbing piece of data. It was not a metal, not a fossil, not a pocket of radiation. It was an echo, a faint, patterned energy signal that emanated from the metallic ruins, but also seemed to come from the sky. It had discovered our radio waves, the ghosts of our broadcasts still whispering out into the cosmos. For tens of thousands of years, it perceived these signals as mere background noise, a strange resonance left over by the pathogen's destructive chemistry. But the mind of Geomysis is patient. It maps patterns over geological time, and it began to notice the structure, the maddening, chaotic, but undeniably complex regularity in the noise. It was not. It was information, language. It was the signature of the same kind of individualistic, high-entropy intelligence that had almost destroyed the planet once before. But this signal was not just an echo from the past. Faint but clear, new patterns were arriving from the void. They were not human. They were other voices from other stars, the ceaseless babbling chatter of a cosmos seemingly teeming with the very plague it had so carefully inoculated itself against. The realization settled through the global network like a wave of ice. Humanity had not been an isolated infection. It was a symptom of a universal condition. The universe was loud. It was filled with these discrete, frantic sparks of consciousness. They were everywhere. The great continent-spanning sensory organs, the towering crystalline spires, and the vast pulsating diaphragms slowly began to reorient. In unison, driven by a single cold, planetary-scale thought, they turned their attention from the soil and the air to the silent, star-dusted blackness of space. The horrifying truth was not that our legacy was a disease. It was that our successor now saw life like us as a cosmic pandemic. And Earth, the quiet, orderly living planet, was no longer just a garden. It had become a fortress, a planetary immune system that had just detected an alien antigen. And it was now, with all the slow, methodical patience of a god, preparing for a war against the very concept of a universe that dared to think in more than one mind at a time.